I always assumed I was joking. Just a harmless remark, you know? A small jab here and there. You're my second choice, I said, laughing as if it weren't a huge thing. I thought that was humorous. Perhaps it was the wine, or simply the tiredness from managing things around the house. But now I'm sitting in my car, holding divorce papers, wondering how the heck we got here. My name is Amanda. I am 31 years old, and this is the story of how a joke shattered my marriage. It all began with the routine, family life, children, and the daily grind. My husband, Eric, and I have 2 children, Mia, an exuberant 7-year-old girl, and Ethan, a sweet but mischievous 4-year-old son. Life revolved around them, getting them ready for school, picking them up, attending birthday parties, running errands, and keeping the house in order. The routine became my universe. I did not work, therefore I was a stay-at-home parent. And I figured that was enough. I believed it was sufficient for me, too. But looking back, I realized that this is where things began to unravel. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was starting to take things for granted. I was so focused on my role that I lost sight of the greater picture. I felt really exhausted. Eric worked long hours, frequently leaving early and returning late. He was a dedicated provider, and I knew it. However, I eventually stopped appreciating it. Instead, I started to resent him. Eric would arrive home fatigued, and I would unload my day. I'd whine about the kids, complain about the house, or lament the million tiny things that had gone wrong throughout the day. But I did not question him about his day. I did not allow him enough space to unwind. And he didn't actually ask about my problems. He would nod and listen, but he seemed as distant as I was. Eric was always the provider, the one who fulfilled his responsibilities. But what about me? What about my needs? I spent the entire day with the kids, taking care of everything. And I did not feel respected. I did not feel seen. It grew over time, this animosity that I had no idea was simmering. And one Friday night, when we finally had a rare moment without the kids, it all came to light. Eric had prepared a beautiful dinner for us, and I had a bottle of wine. We were seated at the table conversing, just the 2 of us. It felt good. It's almost like old times. And then, out of nowhere, I said it just like that. I did not even intend it. It was not intended. But it was there, and I couldn't stop myself from saying it. I could have married someone else. You know, you're my second choice. I laughed, as if it were no great issue, just a joke. But I noticed his face freeze. I noticed it in his eyes. It hurt. He did not laugh. He did not brush it off. He only stared at me, his face pallid. I could feel the tension in the room, but I did not pause. I did not apologize. I felt he was being unduly sensitive. I was simply trying to make a joke, right? But as soon as the words left my mouth, I knew. I realized it was too much. I could see it in his eyes. And deep down, I knew my remarks had harmed him. But I didn't pause to think about it. I was too focused on my own frustrations. At the time, I told myself that it was no big problem. That was just a silly thing I said because I was tired and frustrated. But this wasn't just a joke. It was something deeper. A seed of distrust. A crack between us began to deepen. Things began to change after that. The little things that had never upset us before started to pile up. We started having minor disagreements, things that never used to matter. And even though I didn't recognize it at the time, I sensed a growing distance between us. Eric grew quieter. There is less presence. And, well, I didn't exactly make things simpler. The jokes persisted. I kept saying things, attempting to fill the silence, make him laugh, and elicit a response from him. I had a strong desire for his attention, but I couldn't see it at the time. I didn't understand why he was pushing away. As time went, things worsened. I'd ask him what he'd done after work. He used to say he was out with buddies. He would occasionally be cryptic, providing little information. I didn't question him right away since I didn't want to come across as domineering or nagging. But within, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. I was lonely. I spent the entire day with the kids and managing the house, and he would return home late, fatigued and distant. I did not ask for much. I did not demand attention, every second of the day. But I started to feel invisible. The more I attempted to break the stillness with jokes, the more detached he seemed. The more he removed himself, the angrier I became. One night, I noticed he was texting more frequently than normal. At first, I didn't think much about it. However, the texting became a trend, and the rage inside me began to swell up. Why was he texting so often? Why did it seem like he was concealing something? I convinced myself that I was overreacting. Perhaps that was not a huge issue, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. I wasn't sure what to do, so I kept pretending everything was fine. I kept up the jokes, smiled, and seemed not to care. But the more I feigned, the more I understood I was in pain. And the more I hurt, the angrier I got. I wanted him to notice. I wanted him to return to me. But he did not. Then came the night that altered everything. I assumed it was a routine afternoon. Mia was at a friend's house, and I was ready to meet someone for coffee. But something inside me compelled me to modify my intentions. I chose to surprise Eric instead. I thought that could be a good change. Perhaps it will start something. So, I headed home early. When I came in, the first thing I noticed was the odor. It wasn't the typical aroma of our home. It wasn't a freshly cooked lunch, nor were the children's toys thrown about. It smelled like perfume. I came into our bedroom and froze. Eric was on our bed, but he was not alone. Katie, a woman I didn't know, was sitting near him, laughing, with her legs crossed on the bed. My stomach sank. Katie. The name resonated in my mind like a thunderclap. I didn't know her. I had not heard of her before. Eric's face became pale as he spotted me standing there. Everything froze for a brief moment. Katie jumped up, and Eric struggled with his words. I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't sure how to feel. But I couldn't keep it in any longer. Who the hell is Katie? I inquired, my voice wavering but strong enough to break the quiet. Eric did not respond soon away. His eyes raced about the room, as if he were hunting for an exit. He finally murmured, "Just a coworker." But something about the way he said it did not sit well with me. I was not foolish. I was not blind. A coworker? I repeated, raising my voice with each word. It doesn't look like a coworker to me. I didn't know what to do in the situation. I wasn't sure how to feel. Anger, betrayal, and confusion were all churning inside of me, like a hurricane I couldn't control. Katie raced to get her belongings, murmuring something about needing to leave. But I didn't look at her. I didn't care about her. I didn't care what justifications Eric tried to make. I didn't mind that his face was pale, and his eyes were filled with shame and dread. All I could think about was how everything I'd trusted and thought was safe was slipping away. I stared at him, feeling the weight of our years together come down on me. The laughs, the jokes, and the shared moments all felt like they were meant for someone else. I didn't know who I was looking at anymore. This man, with whom I had established a life and who had once made commitments to me, was now standing there, refusing to be honest with me. Eric rose up, his hands raised as if to defend himself from an impending strike. "Amanda, this isn't what you think," he explained, his voice trembling. "It's not like that.
I didn't mean for this to happen.
She's just a coworker. It's nothing." But I was not buying it. His words became hollow as he spoke more. There was no regret in his eyes and no apology in his voice. I could sense the desperation in his tone as he attempted to explain away something that could not be explained. "I don't think this is what you think," I replied, my voice ripping through the air between us. "What do you think I think this is, Eric? What the hell is going on here?" Katie had already begun to gather her belongings, standing at the entrance, her gaze averted. She did not want to be a part of this, but I didn't mind. She was part of it. She had been a part of the betrayal, and I was not about to let her off the hook that simply. Eric tried to approach me, but I didn't back down. "We were just talking," he murmured. "It's nothing, Amanda." "Nothing happened." Did nothing happen? The words hung in the air like a weight, oppressing me. I'd always trusted Eric. I had always believed in who I thought he was. But now, standing in front of me, I couldn't recognize him. The man I'd married was no longer standing here. Instead, I was staring at someone who was unable to find the words to apologize. He was too busy attempting to hide his lies. "You've been sneaking around with her," I demanded, raising my voice with each syllable. "Is this how you've been spending all your late nights? With her?" Eric froze. I could see the remorse on his face now, a glimmer behind his eyes. But it didn't matter. It was not enough. His apologies were not enough. His explanations weren't sufficient. He had broken everything with his falsehoods, and I couldn't change that. I didn't want to hear his excuses anymore.
I did not want to hear what he had to say.
"You've been lying to me, Eric," I murmured, my words laced with painful truth. "I gave you everything. I took care of this family. I took care of us, our kids, our home, everything. And you couldn't even be faithful to me. You've been sneaking around behind my back, and now you're trying to gaslight me into thinking it's nothing." My chest felt tight. I felt suffocated. The weight of the treachery hit me in waves, each one more intense than the last. I could not breathe. I couldn't think clearly. All I could do was rant and scream at him, telling him how much he had wounded me and damaged. I roamed the room, unsure what to do with myself. The tears threatened to flow, but I couldn't allow them. Not yet. I was too angry. I feel too betrayed. Eric stood there, continuing to explain himself, but I couldn't hear him. Every word he said felt like a lie, another attempt to convince me that everything was fine. But that wasn't okay. It had never been okay. Not after I made that joke, or after I learned about Katie. The argument lasted for hours. I yelled. He attempted to defend himself. But whatever he said, I couldn't hear it. My rage was louder than his apologies or his justifications. Katie eventually departed. I didn't know when exactly. It did not matter. By the time she left, the harm had already been done. Eric remained standing there, looking like he had given up. "I don't think this is working anymore, Amanda," he remarked gently, as if he were speaking the truth. These comments hit me like a slap in the face.
"What?"
I responded, struggling to absorb what he had just stated. "You don't think it's working? You've been cheating on me, lying to me, and now you want to throw away our entire family because of this." His face was rigid, and his jaw clenched. "I can't fix this," he admitted, his voice flat. "It's over." The words did not sink in quickly. I couldn't understand what he was saying. I couldn't comprehend how things had gotten to this point. We had created a life together, a family. And just like that, he was prepared to walk away from it all. I did not cry. Not then. I was too numb. Too angry. But as the reality of what he had just spoken sank in, something inside me clicked. I did not feel sorry. I did not feel heartbroken. No, I felt relief. A strange, horrible feeling of relief. I didn't have to pretend any longer. I didn't have to continue bearing the burden of our marriage on my shoulders. I was angry. I am truly furious. Angry at Eric, Katie, and myself. But ultimately, I was outraged that I had let things to get this far. I'd overlooked the cracks. I had let the gap between us widen without doing anything to stop it. And now, sitting in my bedroom, with the wreckage of my marriage breaking apart around me, I knew one thing for certain. I had lost control of the situation. Eric had checked out long ago. He'd already moved on. And now I was left to pick up the pieces. Eric and I's silence that night felt heavier than any dispute we'd ever had. After the confrontation, it appeared like everything had been said. There was nothing left to salvage. But the gravity of the situation was only just beginning to seep in. Eric moved out the following morning. The transformation in our house was immediate. The silence that crept in every room was oppressive. It was as if the home itself sensed something had changed, that the family we had created was falling apart piece by piece. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where Eric's belongings had once been, wondering when everything had started to fall apart. There were no more late-night conversations, no more sharing our days. I was now utterly alone, with 2 children to care for, a house to run, and the emotional devastation of a broken marriage. At first, I attempted to remain composed for the sake of the children. I told them that their father was merely visiting with a friend for a time, and that everything would be fine. I did not want them to feel the pain of what had occurred. I didn't want them to feel the consequences of our failure. But even as I spoke those words, I knew they were hollow. I wasn't deceiving anyone, not myself or them. Mia and Ethan felt something was wrong. They could sense it. I was no longer Amanda, the mother who took care of everything. Now I was Amanda, a woman whose life had come crashing down. And I wasn't sure how to handle it. I didn't know how to pick up the pieces when I felt like I was already breaking down. But the days kept passing. The children still needed me. They still depended on me. So I put on the mask and kept moving, one foot in front of the other. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the house increased. Every time I thought I had things under control, the fury would resurface, followed by remorse. I did not want to blame Eric. Part of me still loved him, and part of me wished we could make things work. But that wasn't the case anymore. The truth was that I was sitting in the ruins of my own decisions. Every time I glanced at the kids, I saw vestiges of our previous life together. I noticed Mia's expression when she inquired where her father was, and her eyes would widen with confusion when I didn't have an explanation. I noticed Ethan, who was typically full of energy, attempting to keep things light, but I could tell he was feeling the change as well. Then there were Eric's calls. He still called to check on the children, but the talks were unpleasant. The silence was no longer filled with the comfort of familiarity. Now it was just a frigid exchange of greetings. The more I chatted with him, the more I felt like I was losing him, not just as a husband but also as someone I could talk to. The connection that had previously linked us was gone. We were strangers now, conversing in small sentences, separated by the lies and anguish that had taken root between us. At first, I persuaded myself I was no longer angry. I told myself that I needed to focus on the kids, rebuild my life, and be the strong one. But the truth was that I was enraged. So mad. I had never felt more betrayed. I wanted to blame Eric entirely. I wanted to shout at him for bringing Katie into our life. But deep down, I realized I played a role in this. I'd made jokes, pushed him away, and taken him for granted. I hadn't been the wife he needed, and I hadn't realized it until it was too late. One afternoon, a few weeks after Eric moved out, I was sitting in the living room, the kids absorbed in their own world, when I had a flash of insight. It was one of those rare moments when my thoughts stopped spinning, and I was able to view things for what they truly were. I reflected on everything that had happened, the disagreements, the late nights, and the frustration I had buried deep inside. The fact was that I had never really told Eric how I felt. I had never told him what I needed or desired. I had allowed my anger and hatred to build up, and when it spilled out, I couldn't control it. I had let my frustrations take control and pushed him away. And I was so concentrated on what Eric was doing that I had no idea how badly I had hurt him. He had been working hard to care for us, and I had been so preoccupied with my own troubles that I had never asked him how he was doing, how he felt. I didn't understand how I hadn't spotted it earlier. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Or maybe it was simply fear. Fear that if I revealed that I needed him and that I couldn't do everything on my own, I'd have to face the vulnerability I'd spent so long avoiding. But at that moment, I recognized something I hadn't before. I couldn't blame him for everything. I couldn't blame him for the cracks that had developed between us. I had been a part of it. I had pushed him away, just as he had pulled away from me. As the days passed, I began to confront the reality of what had occurred. I could not undo the past. I couldn't take back the terrible words I said. I couldn't unring the bell. But all I could do was move onward. I could learn from my mistakes, pick up the pieces, and become a better mother and person. The hardest aspect, however, was recognizing that my marriage was finished. Eric and I had tried to chat several times since that night, but the conversations never progressed. There was no going back. I knew deep down that he'd already checked out, but there was still a small part of me that hoped we could solve it. That part of me was still holding on, but it was disappearing rapidly. The silence in the home was terrible. It was no longer just the lack of Eric's voice. It was the loss of everything I had known. The house that had once been our home, filled with memories, laughter, and the buzz of daily life, suddenly felt empty. I could still hear our family's echoes in the walls, the way we used to talk to one another, laugh together, and share memories that seemed to last forever. But now those were just memories, and the house felt empty. My days passed in a whirl. I was taking care of the kids and going about my daily routine, but I felt distant from everything. I tried to maintain appearances, particularly for Mia and Ethan. They weren't sure why things had changed. They didn't understand why their father wasn't coming home. I didn't want them to feel the weight of my anguish, so I smiled through the days and pretended everything was all right. But internally, I was unraveling. The guilt that had descended on me was overwhelming. Every time I saw Mia's innocent face or heard Ethan chuckle, I felt like a failure. I'd failed them. I'd failed Eric. And, above all, I had failed myself. I'd let my marriage degrade, without even realizing it. I had been so preoccupied with my own frustrations and worries that I had overlooked the most vital aspect of our relationship. I had taken everything for granted, and now I was paying the consequences. Some days it seemed impossible. There were times when the weight of it all overwhelmed me. I would sit alone in the silence of the house, my thoughts filled with regret and grief. I missed Eric more than I wanted to admit. The man I had loved and trusted was no longer with me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was missing more than just him. It was the version of myself that I had been while we were together. I missed the lady who believed in love and the promise of eternity. But that woman was also gone. And, as much as I hated to acknowledge it, I knew the person I had become was not the person I knew. I had been so preoccupied with my emotions and animosity that I had lost sight of who I was and who Eric was. I had transformed into someone who cracked jokes to fill the stillness, pushing away the person she loved the most. And now I was dealing with the consequences of those decisions. The reality of the divorce was sinking in. The paperwork had been filed. Lawyers were involved. The finality of it all was undeniable. Eric had already moved on. He was seeing someone new, someone who didn't know the man I had loved, someone who didn't know the version of him who remained my husband in my heart, even if he wasn't in actuality. I despised myself for how I felt about her. I despised how much I loathed her, while knowing it wasn't her fault. She was not the person who had betrayed me. She was not the one who broke our vows. But every time I thought about Eric with her, or imagined them together, a terrible sensation of jealousy and hatred washed over me. It was not rational. It was unfair. But it was there, irrefutable. Eric seems to have moved on with ease. I did not comprehend how he could abandon everything we had achieved and start over with someone else. I hadn't expected the bitterness that was festering inside me. I had always prided myself on being the strong one, capable of dealing with any situation. But this was different. What hurt the most was that Eric had not glanced back. He didn't regret it. He didn't appear to care that he was leaving a family he had helped construct. He didn't seem to mind the mess he had left behind. I knew I couldn't keep holding on to that rage. It was eating me alive. But every time I saw him, every time I thought of him leaving without me, it felt like the wound was reopened. I was expected to be stronger than this. I was meant to be better. But I wasn't. Mia and Ethan were adjusting to their new normal. The school routine has changed. No more weekend family outings. Eric and I will no longer spend our movie nights on the couch. I could see it in their eyes. Confusion and grief. They had no idea why things had changed, and every time they asked about their father, it felt like a stab in my heart. Ethan, my darling kid, was too little to comprehend the full scope of the situation. But Mia was old enough to perceive the fissures. I could see the concern in her eyes every time she saw me sad. She attempted to be strong for me despite her young age. I couldn't make up for her father's absence. I couldn't help her feel better. All I could do was be there for her, be the mother she needed, even though I had no idea how to manage it myself. The guilt I felt for them was awful. I'd always been the one who kept everything together and ensured that everything ran well. I'd promised them a family, a house, and a future. And now I'm failing them. I was failing myself. One afternoon, when I was tucking Mia into bed, she looked up at me with her huge brown eyes and said, "Mom, Why is Daddy not coming home? My heart broke. I wasn't sure what to say. I couldn't express it in a way she could understand. So, I did what any mother would do. I lied. He just needs some time, sweetie, I explained, removing a strand of hair off her face. Everything will be okay.
But I knew it would not be.
I knew things would never go back to how they were. And that broke me in ways I didn't realize were possible. The months following the divorce were a fog. There were court hearings, lawyer meetings, and long, restless nights in which I wept myself to sleep, wondering how I had allowed things to become so bad. I pretended to be all right during the day, but at night, when the home was silent, the weight of everything came crashing down. I'd made mistakes. I'd made so many mistakes. But the most difficult pill to take was realizing that the person I had damaged the most was myself. I had let my marriage fall apart. I'd let my bitterness, anger, and pride put a hole between myself and the man I once loved. And now I had to deal with the repercussions. But I had the children. I had them, they had me. And for the first time, I realized that perhaps I didn't need a man to feel complete. Perhaps I can reconstruct my life without him. Maybe I could be strong, even if I didn't feel it right now. It wouldn't be easy, and I'd never get over the pain of my decisions, but I needed to move forward. For Mia.
For Ethan.
For me.
So I did.
I started over. I took it day by day, learning how to be a single mom and being the best version of myself for my children. I had no idea what the future contained, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not make the same mistakes again. I would never take my family, my decisions, or my future for granted again. The days had become normal, but that did not imply they were easy. The once deafening silence in the house had begun to feel like a daily companion. I wasn't just dealing with the fallout of my failing marriage, I was also learning how to live in this new life, one I hadn't expected or planned for. But no matter how difficult it was, I knew I couldn't give up. For the children.
For me.
I had always taken pride in being the one who kept things together, the one who ensured the bills were paid, the groceries were stocked, and the house was in order. But now that Eric was gone, I had to do everything on my own. While that was overpowering, it also gave me an odd sensation of empowerment. I had no choice except to tackle it full on. I had no choice but to go forward, no matter how difficult it felt. I recall one of the first nights after the divorce was official. I was sitting on the couch with the kids in bed, staring at the empty space where Eric's belongings had been. The house was too quiet. But this time, it wasn't simply Eric's absence that left everything feeling empty. It was the awareness that I was in control of my entire existence. I was responsible for everything, every decision, option, and step. That was terrifying. It was also strangely liberating. I had always been terrified to be alone. I had always believed that a relationship would complete me and make me feel important. But in the months following my divorce, I realized something important. I didn't need someone else to complete me. I had been carrying so much weight for so long, believing that I had to accomplish everything myself, that I had lost sight of who I was. But suddenly, I had the opportunity to rediscover myself. I began to prioritize the things I had ignored for years, my hobbies, interests, and the things that made me feel alive. For the first time in years, I took up a paintbrush. I had always liked painting, but it had been so long since I had made time for it. Now, I find peace in the colors, the brush strokes, and the process of turning a blank canvas into something beautiful. I was not flawless. I still had moments of weakness, when the weight of everything washed over me at once. There were nights when I cried and felt as if I couldn't take it anymore. But I've learned to forgive myself. I discovered that the healing process was not linear. There were both good and bad days. And I didn't need to have everything worked out. I just needed to keep going. The youngsters were also adjusting. Mia was still bewildered. I could see it in her eyes, the unanswered questions and the anguish she kept to herself. She missed Eric, and I couldn't change that. But I made it clear to her that no matter what occurred, I would always be there to look after her and Ethan. They needed me to be strong, and I did my best to meet that expectation. But I also let myself be vulnerable. I showed Mia my tears. I showed her that it was okay to be hurt and to grieve. I didn't want her to think she had to bottle up everything as I did. I watched her slowly heal. She gradually began to open up about her feelings, including how much she missed her father. And it stung. It pained to hear her talk about him that way. But it also made me realize that the healing process was for all of us, not just me. We'd all been hurt. We were all affected by what had transpired. And then there was Ethan, my lovely boy. He was too young to comprehend the nuances of what had occurred, yet he recognized that things were different. And I could see it in the way he clung to me, seeking comfort in ways he had never done before.
He needed me.
He required me to be present, strong, and available to him in ways I hadn't been previously. And that was my obligation now. I still felt overwhelmed, as if I were drowning in my own faults. But every time I looked at Mia and Ethan, I knew I had to persevere. I knew I needed to be strong for them. As time passed, I came to understand that life would not be the same. I would never return to the person I was before all of this occurred. And perhaps that was okay. Perhaps it was acceptable to change, evolve, and become someone new. I couldn't change the past, but I could decide how to move forward. Eric had moved on. He'd found someone else. And as much as it hurt, I had to admit that I couldn't keep clinging on to him. He had already left, and clinging to the past would only keep me stuck. I'm not sure what happened to Eric and his new life. I doubt I ever will. Part of me wanted to know, but I realized it was no longer my concern. What mattered now was my personal experience. What important was me and the kids finding out how to go forward. I started therapy. I had never considered it before, but I knew I needed help absorbing everything. I wanted someone to help me disentangle the chaos of emotions I was experiencing. It also helped. It actually did. Talking to someone who wasn't personally connected let me view things more clearly and realize that I wasn't a victim in this. I was not powerless. Yes, I did make mistakes. Yes, I have wounded people. But that didn't define me. I was greater than my mistakes. And during treatment, I learned to forgive myself. It became clear to me that perfection was not required. It was about accepting myself for who I was, flaws and all, and making the best of my current situation. One day, while sitting in the park with the kids and watching them play, I learned something crucial. Life would never be the same as before. But that didn't rule out the possibility of something good. That didn't mean it couldn't be improved. I had been given a second chance to rebuild, to start a fresh life for myself and my children. I had no idea what the future contained, but for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I didn't know all the answers, but I knew I was strong enough to handle whatever came my way. I was no longer a victim of the past. I was a survivor, and I was determined that the lessons I had learned would form a brighter future for myself and my children. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be more difficult days ahead. But I was prepared to face whatever came next. I'm ready to establish a life that I can be proud of. And maybe that's all I needed, to accept who I was and go ahead one step at a time.